progression be? Yeah, he played a bit, I think, with the Oilers. And then, well, actually, when I got the coaching job in Phoenix 30 years ago, I said to Nick Beverly, like, we're trying to build the minor league team. I said, I would love to have Pat Conacher, as one of our older guys. He would have been about 30 then, Barry Melrose in LA. And so they signed him, and he was supposed to play in Phoenix with me, but he was so good at training camp. Barry loved him, and Gretz, he was good buddies with Gretz, and Gretz loved him. So they kept him in LA. So he played his last, I think, few years in LA. But played with the Oilers a bit and bounced around.
For Hal and Greg, we ran a conditioning camp years ago.
Oh man, Tom's having fun, it sounds like.
Tom, turn your sound off. Got tons of interference.
Hey, Tom, turn your sound off.
Oh, it just looks like a great time.
Skype.
Yeah, bro.
Not very good video, eh?
Wally, maybe.
Turn your sound off, Tom.
Oh, okay. I just muted you, Tom. I just muted you because there's too much static. I'll try again. I can't unmute. That's
Tom, turn your sound on. Turn your sound on.
I just muted him, Wally, and I can't unmute him. With the tech wizards here. Oh, he went off again. He'll maybe try again.
Anyway, he beat the WestJet strike, and he got to Latvia. Whether he'll get back or not, we don't know. So
yeah,
whether he wants to get back or not, it's also we don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, Greg, I'm glad you came on because Dominic Pittis called me this morning. He said he's going to join us. So I'm not sure when that's going to be, but he was on the road going to school. Greg, I before we got into the stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, which was really creating offensive chances below the goal line, in and around the goal line, and the really neat little tactics that you talked on. It's some interesting, but Tim playing defense and myself coaching defense, I couldn't think of the offensive extremities of what you were talking about. I just saw breakdowns and people not being able to maintain D side. So, I wouldn't mind talking about that moving forward, and because I really believe the offensive game is taken over in a good way. It's really entertaining, but there's still that line of defensive responsibility and defensive skating. And I use two words. Offensive skating is proactive, maneuverability, gaining time and space, deception, which I think, Greg, you referred to, and using all kinds of puck protection tactics and going to right spaces and getting there before the puck did and protecting the space. So it's proactive, but defensive skating is reactive. And I've literally spent my lifetime dedicated to that because of the embarrassment we faced playing against the Soviets. So when I watched your stuff, I said it's really good to talk about this, but I'm still scratching my head when I see defensive players in the NHL not play a one-on-one fundamentally correct, even though it's more difficult, Tim, to maintain D side because of the deception, and the quick turns are so much quicker and they're getting to space sooner. So, hi, Sammy. Good to see you. Anyway, any comments on that, Tim or Craig?
Well, just I guess for starters, I don't know if it's more difficult, Wally, or like you say, there just seems to be a bit of a lack of emphasis on it. There's not a lack of emphasis on defending, I think, and Greg, you can weigh in as well, or anyone, but I think they're putting so much emphasis these days on puck pressure, and with one or two people, second quick, third quick, that, I think the containment piece of defending is, it's largely lost. They just want to sort of go for it and try to turn over the puck and transition. I think maybe that's at the bottom of it, but Wally, I don't want to go back to the days where all coaches are spending all their time talking about defending, because the game's way more interesting on the other side.
I still think we have some ways to go. I pulled a great clip the other day from Vegas series. Let me see if I can find that. It'll be terrible because I'll just show it on my phone. But basically, there was a breakout that Edmonton had started. See how good I can do this. And the first guy comes up and angles. The second guy slides back and does contain, which I think eventually we're going to get to the point where both guys swing and they're both skating forward. So I'll do it one more time here for you guys. Hit the play button.
We're looking at the D now.
Yeah, look at the team in white. Yeah. So first guy goes, swings, second guy slides over, but he's still skating backwards with it.
Yeah.
And then you can see he kind of picks and gives some time for his partner.
You're
but there's still that opportunity where we're going to have both guys skating forward and swinging and angling. I think the angling, particularly with the weak outside edge of a lot of youth players, is where a lot of these concepts break down, or, every coach says, go, 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 hard, 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 and then they overplay everything.
Yeah.
But
I think the other piece is, so many more teams now than back when I played. So many more teams are just playing like a hard man-to-man defense. I think there's a few more holes to be had when you're playing a strict man-to-man. There's less clogging of lanes and clogging of the middle, but there's so much movement now, and there's so many, face-off plays with different variations. It's really the simplest way to coach is to say, hey, we're playing man-to-man, but be ready to sag and help if you really have to. But so many more teams are playing that now. Seem to be a few more holes.
And it's tough, right? Because when do you play man? When do you play zone? I mean, every single team in the NHL pretty much plays a combo now, where it's almost zone or swarm down low, and then it goes high and everyone goes man to man.
Yeah.
Because the offensive teams are figuring out how to create time and space. And Wally and Tim, I think you both are part of the newsletter. Hal, I think you might be as well. I've got a piece coming out on what I call working up and how it creates confusion if you're not playing that man to man above the top of the circles.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see the cat and mouse game kind of playing itself out at the highest of levels. You guys have seen it for years, but just like how the different tactics today are being implemented, and then what we're trying to do to get away from the different holes that it creates.
Yeah, and I think that's we'll get to Sammy's question, but that was exactly the case when I was working with Peter and I were working with the Danish women. Like the Czechs were probably the best at 2-3 years ago, before Canada even got into it, at the sort of the 5-player movement in the offensive zone. Thomas used to call it offensive zone regrouping, where when the puck went up high, they would not just have one forward come up the way lots of NHL teams do now to use that space up high. They would often have 2 forwards come up high, where they had basically 4 people across the blue line. And if you didn't react in basically a man-to-man defensive posture, you gave up way too much time and space and speed to the offense and made them really difficult to play against. So we definitely went to that with the Danes. We didn't go to full man-on-man like you were saying, Greg. It was like more of a combo, sort of a zone or a swarm down low. But when the puck goes past the circle tops, it's definitely man-on-man time, person-on-person for the political correctness, I guess. And it's really the best way to handle that or defend that. And it also, like I said, off face-offs, there's so many face-off plays going on now. If you don't go man-to-man off defensive zone faceoffs for sort of the rodeo 5 to 8 seconds, then you're going to give up opportunities. So I love the way the offensive game is kind of really morphed and changed and come on, and it's really fun to watch, I think.
Just wanted to, Sammy's question on angling with kids. Sammy, it's really interesting because when I played for Father Bauer, he had a drill favorite. And his drill favorite was one-on-one angling. This is with the national men's team. And it was literally a forward carrying the puck around behind the net and trying to get the length of the ice against one checker. And all he emphasized was keeping the puck on the outside, forcing him to the wall. And he started from different positions, but that's basically all he did. So I don't know if anybody else has done anything special that's worked for them on angling.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. So here's a drill that I do on following up with Wallies. So I actually did start with that when I first thought about angling and how do I teach it well. Moved to another thing, and this is kind of where I am currently. So basically, we've got this player right here on the blue line with pucks, person on the other side on the dot/blue line. Only thing you tell them is you can't skate backwards, and this person's going to then go down and shoot on the far side. So I'll let it play out, and this is where I've settled on teaching angling from both defense and offensive perspective.
And you know, Greg, I'm looking at that. We used to do a drill with the national team girl, Sammy, and make me remember way back that, you know, if you stop it right now, so there, if you know, you could morph this, Sammy, to sort of get the same idea across to defensemen once they've learned this kind of skill, because angling is angling, doesn't matter where you are. But if you push the puck carrier line back to the hash marks or somewhere inside the blue line and started the D basically just inside the blue line on the dot where they normally would be, and just do the same drill, but tell the D their first 2 or 3 steps or strides backwards need to be to the middle of the rink to close the gap. And then same thing, like you're not allowed to skate backwards once you reach the red line. That so they sort of basically take the middle of the ice, you know, as the forward starts coming up the boards, and then they'd have to pivot the forward somewhere before the red line and then start angling in a forward skating motion. You could just do this exact same formation, and that would get the idea through to. Do you understand what you guys have that picture?
Yeah, I got that. Thank you, Tim.
We used to do something similar, but with the national team, just trying to get the girls to understand, like when you're in that offensive blue line, when the play starts coming at you, you don't back up right away. You really go sideways right away. You should go along the blue line for 1 or 2 strides and then start working yourself backwards, you know, to start squeezing that forward. And then if you do a good job, then you can turn and just angle them like in the surf mode kind of thing. The other thing you do is if you're the left or the right D and the play's coming up your side and you start moving to the middle, if your partner's in a good situation, you could literally just switch and let your partner come across. That's a situational thing if there's nobody on the weak side. It's like a 1-on-2 kind of situation. Anyway.
Yeah, another thing that I love to do just to get comfortability on the outside edge, because I find that's just always the weakest spot and kind of like the bottleneck with a lot of players, particularly at the lower levels where the skill's still being developed, is just between every drill we go, you know, 1 lap, but instead of doing a normal lap, you have to do crossovers on the straightaway the entire time. So you're constantly on your outside edge, and just working that separation of upper and lower and being able to have that comfortability coming on an arc rather than doing straight lines.
Yeah, it's in the end, it's all about taking away time and space for the puck carrier instead of backing up and letting them look around and try to figure out what he's going to do. You put them under pressure as soon as you're safe and comfortable doing so, just basically makes them make up their mind, and that's the essence of good defending, is take away time and space from the offense. In a well, use the word safe or contained manner. Like I said, I think a lot of NHL teams that go to the extreme, and the Flames might be one of the more guilty ones, that where they overpressure and get caught and get beaten one-on-one.
So,
Well,
Sammy, does that answer or help
That
guys
does,
where
yeah,
we need to
thank you.
be?
Thank
You're
you so much.
muted, Molly.
I see it and being a goalie, you see it, and Tim, you referenced drills that we all did. I don't think I appreciated how you take away time and space and maintain that gap going sort of backwards to forwards until I became a rec hockey player myself and was like, oh, this is much, much harder than my players made it look. And so I was having a tough time reverse engineering it as to how to create that at the younger levels. So, while I see the Toronto Six do it, they make it look easy. Most of my teaching is with either U9s or adult women that are brand new to the sport. So sometimes reverse engineering things that I can't do that well has been tough. So this is great, and some good little tidbits. Who
Sammy
knows?
Joe,
Maybe my rec hockey, I'm just going to be like a wicked defenseman now.
I think what you're describing, Sammy, is the coaching dilemma. We're talking at a level of historical evolution where you only skated forwards, had to set your gap and transition skating backwards. And that's sort of, to me, that's why transition skating is still important, although not as important, because I think a better advanced tactic is that of surfing or angling. And I really worry, and I've questioned a number of professional coaches about ignoring the ability to transition skate, which just means control of your skating forwards to backwards, controlling your approach, and as Dave King called it, a one-on-one low zone coverage, keep your toe cap square. So the inside edge mastery is totally essential in one-on-one defensive play because your skating is controlled. It's reactive relative to what's happening to the play, the team with the puck, and you have to adapt your approach, controlling the space, steering them to space you want them to go. So when you're teaching, the transition skating is important, but I think now at a minor level, and I'm talking Tom's U13 team, he surfed really effectively, and they did transition skating backwards as well in both. Okay, hope that helps, Sam, with the kids. But Don Cherry brought his dog on the ice with the Boston Bruins.
No, Roger Nielsen.
Roger Nielsen?
Yeah, with the Peterborough Petes.
Okay.
Yeah, put the player behind the net, and the dog showed them how to contain and angle. Yeah, that was Roger. There definitely needs to be, I think, a level of skating proficiency. I'm not sure, Greg, you could weigh in too, but at what level you might want to start teaching sort of the surfing and angling to young kids, but certainly Tom's group or AAA Pee-wee groups could probably handle it. But yeah, it's and I think part of what I was saying, Wally, is I totally agree with Dave's old stance on it, but a lot of the NHL teams are getting more proactive with their defending, not reactive, in pressuring the puck. And that's where lots of them do get caught, but that's the way they're going these days.
Okay. Listen, Hal, you had posted shoulder on shoulder. That's playing the rush, correct?
Well, no, it's about defending. It's about how to position the puck against the puck carrier while you're angling. So we'd take a skater and have him go around the net, and then the defending skater out in front of the net, and now you've got to come around. But if you come too quick, if you get ahead of the puck carrier's shoulder, they're going to cut inside on you. So it's more about a positioning type of play. And then as we've talked, forcing the puck carrier out to the wall, where then you can then move into whether it's female or male, you can move into stick on stick or play through the hands to try to regain possession of the puck. The difficulty at the younger ages is skating ability, matching skating abilities. Because if the kid with the puck's really fast and the other one can't skate fast on that angle, the puck carrier just blows right by him. There's little. I always ask kids if they've taken geometry yet, depending on what age they are. But the big circle is a longer journey than a small circle, and so most of them don't get it till they're in high school. But we start with the younger kids trying to do that kind of a thing because it isolates. What we're showing, Greg, that was a great thing you showed, Greg. I like that. But if that defender doesn't skate well, or on par with the forward, that's not going to work too good. The same concept is fine though, right? Don't overskate it. And I'm going to go watch some the prospects in the North American Hockey League tomorrow morning and on Saturday, and I'll see what I see that relates to all of this.
Hal, I found the same thing trying to defend like Glenn Anderson or something, that I really couldn't keep up with him. I wasn't very effective at angling him.
It's all about skating, eh?
Yeah, it's all relative. You're muted there, Wally.
I always advocated at the national women's level, the player playing the puck carrier in the D zone had to finish the check or make contact before the hash marks, face-off hash marks. And that was just the idea of, if you did get in the seam, they were going to walk it, and then it got to be a debate of how to cover that player coming up the wall. So, there's so many different coaching tactics and techniques. Angling, it should be the easiest one to teach. At doing Hockey Alberta clinics, they have actually the sheepdog one, where the sheep are steered by the dog to go through the gate they want them to go through. So, Dominic, I don't know if you joined long enough, but initially I wanted to talk more about D-zone cover and the advanced offensive tactics that were being exploited below the goal line that Greg brought up, because quite simply, I don't believe NHL defensemen can control their skating to that degree. They don't master their inches, inside edges. They don't keep their toe cap square. They get beat one-on-one along the boards. They go out too far and get extended, get outnumbered. And with the Flames especially, that was evident in a lot of highlight reel goals that I watched this year. So, Dominic, any comments on how we've gone from sort of angling in the neutral zone and surfing and one defenseman playing rush backwards? But I just wanted to refer to D-zone skating specifically, whether it's man-on-man or zone. It's going to be one or the other in different situations. I agree with Greg. It's got to be what it should be in the situation you're in. And you have to intuitively, as a unit of 5, work off each other to avoid giving anybody a spatial advantage. So, Don, anything you can add to the angling with your girls right up to your work with the NHL teams?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can speak to, like Bob Hartley. That was I mean, he had certain things that he worked on, and that was one of them. Obviously, stick position was huge, and he was the master of being able to stop a clip a half second before, saying if your stick was here, you'd be eliminated from the middle. And he did some pretty elementary and basic drills, even in pregame skate, and like in the NHL team. Like he'd do one where it was the repetition, and it wasn't necessarily the practice of it, but he would have all the players stand at the red line and then dump a puck towards one end, and the one player would go and they could choose either side, and the second player would angle, and he was nothing groundbreaking in the way that he wanted, hands through hips and stick on puck and everything else. So, but that was a huge part. And I mean, obviously it led into everybody from, Lance Buma to Johnny Goudreau being able to get in front of people. And that was a big part of his, and his success. And say what you want about anything that he's done, but he's won at every single level. But that was at every single level, whether it was, in Switzerland when he coached us, or whether it was in, with the Flames, or whether it was the American League or Russia, wherever. I'm certain that was a big part of it. So, I'm a big believer in it as well. Obviously, the game's changed in regards to the body contact, and that's been well discussed on this forum as well, as far as getting in front as opposed to, taking yourself out of play and trying to go through somebody. But, we do it a lot with the girls. Obviously, I think it's an important piece. I think the body contact piece is a big thing with the girls in regards to, the bump. Is there a bounce when you go in with the girls? Like there's some that they come in recklessly and it's contact, and there's a a pop and a bounce, and then it ends up being a penalty. So that to me has been a big detail to try to get them to understand. But I mean, yeah, I think it's a huge. I mean, obviously, it's a huge part of the game, but just trying to have it, and I saw Greg's drill as far as from, and I love it as far as coming off from the blue lines. I think, and I can just speak for myself with the girls. Like we've got 14, like U16, like 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old girls. I feel like I've got to bring it down smaller area a little bit, because when you have a bigger kind of runway, if you will, then I think some of the details get lost in the shuffle, and then the rate of speed is preventative, and having them understand to be able to get, whether it's hips in front and not be just those right small details. So, but yeah, and as you said, in regards to the defensive zone coverage, this was always a bone of contention in regards to whether it was, when does it become man on man, or is it man on man? And I had phone calls from when we were down in the minors, is that we're not man on man, but then you'd have the D that are involved, and what's the philosophy? Does the winger stay with them, or does the D not come up past the top of the circles? And there's that switch between the D and the winger. So yeah, it was probably the one thing that was the most debated is, and my time there was, what is the best D zone type of system to be able to, to eliminate, what's going on. I mean, you watch, and it's my own personal thing, you watch what Vegas did against Edmonton as regards to, and I know John Stevens was, he's a defensive coach there. I thought it was impressive, right? You've had those guys, and they Edmonton, Woodcroft was in Bakersfield, and very much the same idea, trying to get the motion of the 5-player motion involved. And their D didn't, from what I saw, their D didn't come above, whether it was the hash or the top of the circle, and they were in zones very much, as opposed to having the the winger going all the way down to the goal line. So from my perspective, I think that's one of the better ways to deal with it, especially when you have that 5-player motion. But again, just my 2 cents.
Dom, when I talked about the rule with the national women's team, finish the check before the hash mark, that's exactly the dilemma of one-on-one D zone cover. How close are you? When that puck's moved and changes location, who's the new first player on you? And how do they manage to control that defensive side and create no time and space for the puck carrier to execute? Because at the NHL level, they're literally offensive rimming the puck from the top down and from the corner to the far point just to change the location where there is some space to create some offense. So that defensive player number one, whether it's a forward who's first in the D zone back, maybe playing the puck carrier, I think you've got to have that pressure. You can't penalty kill with 5, although I think some teams may do that if the difference in ability is really great. Anyway, any other comments, Greg? Because I know you were interested in talking about the interchangeability and the way the game's progressing relative to 5-on-5. And I think defensive switching isn't as common in hockey as it is in basketball. So I'm just not sure how far to take this switching in terms of switching roles in hockey, whether it's the game's too fast to switch.
You're talking
I think maybe.
offensively, Wally.
Sorry for you, Tim.
Sorry, I just said to clarify, you're talking about switching roles offensively.
Oh, I'm talking both, but I'm basically talking switching defensively.
Just wanted to clarify. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I want to back it up maybe a few steps, because we kind of touched on it very briefly, but I think it's a rabbit hole that is worth going down, of just the idea of self-organization by players and teams and having the ability to read off each other. Like, this is a big reason I try to very rarely use a whistle in my practices. And I will run, say, like a drill, and then the exact next rep, everyone's got to switch roles. You can't do the same thing twice. So there's got to be a communication between players and organization between players, and trying to become part of the fabric of how we go about developing, and just having players be able to figure it out. Because a lot of times I've found, particularly with house players coming into high school here in Columbus, is that they've never had like the freedom on their own, nor do they really have the confidence of their skills that you get maybe a AAA level or a higher end level, where the real development needs to be on having them becoming better coaches of themselves and being able to operate within a team environment, having that confidence to step up and say something or take a little bit of responsibility. So how do we do that? I think that's where the rabbit hole can start to lead you down into some interesting spots, because that's where I find to be the biggest gap, especially with the players that I see quite often. It's just the lack of self-organization, confidence, assertiveness that you might get with someone who's a little more self-driven, that would find their way automatically kind of self-selecting out towards those higher levels that many times you hear people talking about. So that's number one. And then second piece with the just reading off each other, like, how do we do that? Like, if you take out a whistle, well, now the players have to look at each other. They have to slide in, they got to slide out. Or if you're challenging them to do something different every single time, or a different role every single time, well, now they have to figure it out with their teammates. Okay, well, if I'm doing this, you're doing that. Who's taking the third role or fourth role or whatever it may be? And all the benefits that leads to that. I think that's had more of a positive impact on player development than any system or drill itself. Is just setting up the environment where they've got to self-organize and read off each other consistently. And it's not just, oh, you've got to read to do a switch or this. It's more part of the fabric.
Greg, excellent point. Dom, I want to come back to what you said when you're working in the American League and the father team said, no, we don't do that. And they don't have that flexibility at the NHL level. They're coaching by telling and the rule of play, which is, to me, that's not the way to go anymore. And if Greg's talking about this with his kids, I'm talking about this with the pros. And if the executive coaching team at each level of that organization isn't on the same page, then you're in trouble. So the idea of player freedom and decision making, I think, is sort of the starting point in terms of knowing what they're doing and possibly even suggesting what could be done better. I think at that level, that's a very big possibility, tapping into their intuition, their knowledge, and their skill sets to do what needs to be done to gain time and space or to take time and space away. That's the way the game's going. I think we're being left in the dust as coaches, I think. Jordan, well,
Yeah, no,
Prince Edward Island. Jordan's in Prince Edward Island, so he's speaking at the Futures Convention out there. So go ahead, Dom. Reply.
yeah, no. I was just gonna I saw it was interesting. I was watching the last Oilers game, and they ended up there was a power play that they got, and I think it was Gulletson. He runs the power play there, and obviously they're have a record-breaking historical power play. And he came over to, and I can't remember which game it was, but he came over, and he wasn't running the meeting. It was either a timeout or whatever it was. He wasn't running the meeting. He was just basically overseeing, and it was the five guys that were having the conversation as to what they were going to do. Right. To your point, Wally, I mean, obviously these are elite players, and Goldie's smart enough to understand and to recognize as to what they're seeing is probably the most important thing. I think it's just as I say, you're trying to guide. I think when you get, and so that's power play. You've got these elite guys that are doing it. I think when you come to when it's defensive zone, coverage or system, and I agree, like the players are the one, and you want to have their input and everything else. And this is, probably doesn't even need to be said, but at the end of the day, if something goes sideways, they're going to be like, well, who's the coach here, right? And then it's the managerial that comes down on it, and that's ultimately what it came down. It came down to a finger pointing thing, right? Because the situation that happened with us, there's a player that got called up, and the player said, they said, well, we're not man on man here. And the player said, well, that's what they do down in Stockton. And so then all of a sudden there's a phone call right down to me and said, hey, like, you guys play man on man? And it was this whole thing. But, again, it's maybe the play, like, obviously, the player not wanted to take responsibility for a read that he made on the ice. And it was easier to say, kind of put blame. But hey, I agree. The game's played better when the players have more, skin in the game, accountability, being able to make those decisions, and the coaches are just guiding. But the reality is that I think, you've got to, as a coach, especially at that level, you've got a real sort of runway as to how you're doing things, and they don't have the runway to be able to, to not have something black and white. And so when the question's being asked, yeah, no, this is the way that we're doing it. So I get it. In an ideal world, in a perfect world, yes, you have this collaborative type of thing going on. But unfortunately, a lot of times coaches that are there don't have the runway to be able to have those types of, Socratic type of conversations and environments. It's very, very much a dictatorship in the way that, hey, I have this short window. They say the expectancy of a coach is 3 years. Well, after year one, if your defensive zone is spotty and everything else, you might not get to see the light of day of year two. So just my 2 cents.
Tim?
Yeah, I think this all gets into the area we've been in time and time and time again. It's part of the art of coaching. There can't be. I don't think it's total freedom for the players, and I don't think you leave it totally up to them to figure it out, because some of them will never figure it out what to do. I think there has to be some guidance and guidelines from the coaches, and some freedom for the players in all situations, offensively and defensively. But if you don't help them through a situation and sort of give them a framework or a starting point defensively, and that can be as simple as, like we talked about, we're going to be basically like the old school defending. We're going to basically be a zone defense kind of team, or we're going to be a man-on-man kind of team defensively, or in like more now, we're going to be zone defense when the puck's below the circle tops and try to swarm and compress space. But whenever the puck gets passed up to the top or carried up to the top, that triggers man-to-man defending. I think you have to have that starting point for your players, and then question them, and don't try to tell them what to do in every situation, but give them some freedom. But you have to give them that kind of organizational, structure, whatever word you want to use, or system. They need a starting point. And I think that's crucial, and that's where the art of coaching kicks in. How do you help them learn the situations and how to handle the situations that they're being confronted with now, with 5 players moving around in the offensive zone? Like, it's tough, and it's almost impossible as a coach to try to tell them what to do in every situation, because there's so many different situations. So that's where the questioning and the freedom for the players to figure it out sort of comes in. But I think you need that basic structure first. Go ahead, Hal.
Yeah, I would agree. I've coached an awful lot of kids, even up through high school, whatever, who really, by the time I get them, they haven't got a clue what they're supposed to do. They just have been playing hockey, and the wings are the worst. And the D get more coaching. I don't think forwards get as much coaching and how to react to different situations. So my theory was you've got to have some structure, some organization, and then you can create off of that once you understand what not only the puck carrier is going to do, but if you're supporting, you've got to have an understanding of what the options are, and then you use your reactive skills. But I've always said it in the youth game, minor hockey game, and down here is puck support is the winger coming up the ice, the next guy's coming and he's 20 feet away in the middle going pass to me, and then the third winger is coming in and says pass it to me, and there's no sort of idea that you go over and support, or you move into a position to support it's just all about passing it to me, pass it to me type of thing. And they all go in a line right up the ice, and they're so easy to defend against. And so it's a great point. This is the role of really what I call transformational coaching. And if you get a group of kids and you have success with it and they move on to the next coach who doesn't believe in that, it's sort of like, that's not, it's hard to have a long lasting impression on kids. It's the right way to go for sure. But it is a challenge, because I think when I was coaching in the elite league in Minnesota, which were the top 100 players in Minnesota in high school, they had Phil Housley was helping me. It was during one of the strike years. And we asked the kids, how many coaches have you had? They're 17 or 18 years old. somewhere in the range of 80 to 90 different coaches. And they all have a different point of view. So my challenge was always, I want to be the coach they remember the most and for the right reasons. And so anyways, that's my thought on all that.
And maybe one just as one example is, you know, in terms of laying down like a sort of a defensive philosophy or structure or system, you know, a lot of people talk about how offensively, one of the most dangerous places to have the puck is, you know, back of the net or below the goal line. So if you flip that, one of your guidelines defensively is we don't want to let the offense get there. And so when you're defending one-on-one, one of my big pet peeves, I see it all the time with the Flames, unfortunately, and lots of teams is, you know, a defenseman or a forward's going to defend somebody sort of below the goal line off the side of the net, and they overplay in a pressure mode, and the offensive player just spins off, gets to the back of the net. Like, for me as a coach, that is a primary. Like, don't let that player get to the back of the net carrying the puck. Now, they're going to get there occasionally, passing it there, like Wally was saying, rimming it or whatever, but you don't want to give it to them. And that's where, Wally, that's where sort of some of the contain mode comes in defensively, is you want to, you know, this is a little bit old school defending, but I think it's still applicable. You want to steer them away from the net and up the wall. And then the question becomes, if you can't, because of your distance, eliminate them by the hash marks, okay, then what happens? Because you need help plugging the seam there. And that's where the guidelines help. Like, do we want to keep it away from the back of the net? If we do, then we're going to have situations where people are going up the wall and might have a little bit of time and space. And then what do we do from there? And, you know, for me, it's simple. If they carry it above their circle tops, then because you don't want to give time and space to the offense, whether it's a forward or a D, you stay on that person. You don't want to give them time and space. Like, stay on them. So those are kind of some of the simple rules we use with the Danish girls in particular, but I've always used with my teams. But you give them sort of situational guidelines, and then you got to read and react in the moment, of course.
Tim, I want to make a point exactly on what you said, because it's totally what's missing. The players understand how to handle those situations, but they can't perform because they can't control their skating. Dave King did it in 2 words: toe cap square. You don't overskate. You don't get turned so they can cut back on you. So the inside edge mastery, his teaching point of toe cap square, was almost enough with the national team. But it isn't today. Those players, even at the NHL level, need to work on those inside edges deliberately before a game, because when you play without the puck, that inside edge mastery is controlled skating. It's totally lacking today because all of the work is crossovers, acceleration, creating time and space, and you still have to work on the other side of the fundamental tactical skating defensive going to handle the one-on-one. So that's my technical point. I did it at an HP1. I would do it with any NHL team that was willing to experiment with it to help them handle their one-on-one. All the things you go and are talking about, I think are being talked about and told. Maybe not clearly enough, but what's missing is those big bodies can't get low enough, break down, like when you got a on punt coverage, you got to break down your running to control your speed to contain the runner to the inside. That's lacking fundamentally, the controlling of the speed, maintaining your lane. That's a fundamental to me, it's so fundamental and it's missing. And I'm saying, I go back to Craig. I says, Craig, they can't do that. So we can do all what we want offensively because we're not doing anything to teach one-on-one defensively in that skill. I'm done. Okay, go ahead, Tim.
I'm not sure that I think a lot or most or almost all NHL defensemen are capable of doing that. I think it's much a mental skill. Defending, angling, surfing, containing is as much a mental exercise as it is physical at that level, where they're all very good, competent skaters. It's what's going on in their head where there's a lot of breakdowns in my mind. They're not thinking contained, they're thinking pressure, and that leads them to be overly aggressive, get out of position, and be vulnerable defensively. I think it's as much of a mental thing as it is physical. And sorry if I interrupt you, Hal. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in there.
Oh,
Tim, you're totally right. Everything starts with the head, the mind. Your controlled skating starts with the mind. Control your speed. But the physical feeling of doing that requires a different tactile sensitivity to your inside edges. And that's all I'm referring to. It starts with the head, the concept of not going too hard, not over skating. And I'm just saying a little bit of time spent on this to create the feeling of those edges, which you might need to have used differently in a game situation. But you're totally right. It's all about the mind. That's where it starts.
So much of hockey is in the mind, as we all know. The hockey sense is, as important as skating ability in lots of ways.
Sammy, I got a question. Like talking at the NHL level, it's all offense. And they're creating new ways of creating offense. And I think right now that's winning in the NHL. It's selling tickets. But at your level, are the offensive abilities that extreme that they cause that much stress for your defense? Or is it still a fundamental game, more linear?
You mean at the Toronto 6 level, not at my
Yes.
U9 Squishmallows?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was interesting is that Geraldine coached, played in an era with Tim and I and you. And so the game has evolved, right? And so what was interesting was the conversations that she was having with our defensemen, who all have come from college playing this kind of system, and way more movement, and that they didn't have the ability to contain. They didn't have some of those basics, but that she didn't have the ability to teach sort of forward angling and all of that. So it was interesting that they had the conversations together, and to see them learn from each other was really fascinating. So I thought that was great. I'm sending Geraldine and my other assistant coach down to one of the NHL coaches conference down in Nashville, just to be able to have these conversations at a higher level, which I think is really important, because the players coming in now are so smart. Like Dom said, that they can coach themselves. So how do you impart that wisdom to them, but also teaching the basics that a lot of them just seem to not have, because they've done so many skill sessions, they've done so many of these other things that, as Tim mentioned, something simple as not allowing them below your goal line is not really part of their thought process. It's more the individual skill that it takes to get there. So I would say all this is very pertinent to the Toronto 6. I must admit that it is, even as an analyst on TSN, it's one of my weakest parts of recognizing in a game, because anytime the puck goes into the defensive zone, my eyes immediately go to what the goalie is doing and the movement the goalie is doing around the net, and if they're off angle a little bit. And so even when I played, I never saw my defensemen. I didn't see what they were doing because that wasn't part of what I needed to know. I simply needed to know where their players were in relation to my D, but I didn't need to know if they were off or doing the right or the wrong thing. I simply needed to react to what was in front of me. So I think I counsel goalies now to be way more perceptive in practice, not necessarily in a game, because I think in a game it's really important to just be in the moment and totally focused. But just in case you want to coach someday, have an awareness of all of the positions. I now play defense often in rec hockey, and I'm often put in situations that I think, I have to think back to some Sharks calls as to like, how am I supposed to play this? So yeah, it's that was a convoluted way of saying all that, Wally. But yes, it is very similar at our level.
I have the comment I want to make. I'm sorry, Tim, but I have to say this.
No problem.
I wouldn't send them to the NHL conference. They're not going to learn anything about defensive tactical skating. I did a presentation at one of those high-level conferences, and they just asked their skills coaches, and Dom, you can speak because you were one. They do offensive skill work. So when I was doing it in Saskatoon, Dave King sent me to Saskatchewan's HP conference, and the Phoenix Coyotes skills coach was there. And he did his session, which was all offensive skating. And I asked him questions about the defensive counter side of the offensive skating and what he would do. He never thought about it. Dave used to have a point. Offensively, soft shoulder. You feel pressure on one shoulder, you're going the other way. And he hadn't heard of that, yet Dave was managing that team at one era. But that whole side of Geraldine going there to, you can ask those coaches these questions. They haven't had to coach defensive tactical skating. They've coached defensive tactical play by suggestion, but not by technical details to the degree it could be. Hopefully they do come up with something, that they come up with some takeaways, but I'm not sure what sessions and who's presenting on it. But when I watch the playoffs, Dom, I am very impressed with the D-zone play of Las Vegas. They very little time and space all over the ice, particularly in the offensive zone. So, okay, Tim, you had a point, and then wanted to get back to Craig again.
Yeah, Greg's got to run, it looks like, but
Okay.
I just had a comment, like it was really interesting to hear Sammy talking about how when the puck goes in the offensive zone, her eyes, or defensive zone, her eyes go right to the goalie. So I'm the exact opposite. Like I almost never watch the goalies. I watch the play that's going on, and it's really hard sometimes not to just watch the puck. Like I really, like a player on the ice, I try to be aware of where the puck is, but I'm really, the play's in the corner and they're moving the play in the corner. I'm sort of watching what's going on behind in the next layer in the middle of the ice to see how the players off the puck are reacting to what's going on. It's a bit of a skill, but the funny thing was, having said that, I think it was before Sochi, so about 10 years ago, Mel asked me if I'd go and watch Shannon play when she was playing at Nate, because they were playing state in the Alberta League Championship. And she said, I want you to go and watch Shannon play and just, tell me what you see. And it was really my first experience of, it was really hard at first, but I just had to watch Shannon. And actually, it was an interesting experience just watching her react to the puck coming over the red line, over the blue line, and what she was doing. Same thing when the play's in the corner. I'm not watching the play now. I know where it is, but I'm watching what Shannon's doing. And it was a very interesting experience and I probably gave Mel a way too detailed anal report on her, but of course it was largely good. She was a fantastic goalie, but it was, there are different ways to watch the game. As we all know, you can watch it as a fan and not really pay attention to any detail. You can watch it from a goalie perspective. You can watch it from a defensive perspective, an offensive perspective. But the real art of coaching is being able to take in a lot of all that stuff at the same time. But it is a learning curve for sure.
Dom, any comments?
Yeah, just you talk about Vegas, and as I say, I've got a little bit of a coach crush on John Stevens. I'll say, because I had so first of all, I played against him, and he was mostly a minor league guy, and he made life really hard on me when I played against him, and then when I actually saw him coaching, and obviously had the success with Darryl in Los Angeles and everything else, and then he actually presented. It was at a Hockey Canada, one of the coaching conferences that they have for the World Juniors and U18s and the 17s and whatever it was. And he started going into the details of defensive zone, and the things that you're talking about, Wally, were the things that he really emphasized, and whether it was, controlling the hips and being able to but those small details that he focused on, I'm certain that he does that, continually with Vegas, and he was in Dallas before and everything else. So, you talk about certain skill coaches that only focus on the offensive side. I think, from my perspective on what he did, like, he's so detailed on how to defend, and so that to me wasn't like a coincidence that they were able to contain those top guys, right? Like that, like those are generational players that couldn't do anything 5-on-5. And I think, if you really were to look at it, like those small details of controlling hips, and Tim talked about keeping them away from the back of the net, and some of those smaller details, like I do believe that those would be details that he would be imparting on his teams. And it's, as I say, it's not a coincidence that they were able to control those big guns in Edmonton.
Sammy Joe, I'd have Geraldine get a hold of him, and I'd invest in a trip down and spending a day with a guy like Stevens, because Sammy was your head coach was an outstanding offensive defenseman, and you don't want to take away that gift.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I want for my coaching staff is some mentorship that they are going to follow up with, and I think this will be the first time surrounded by so many other coaches. So that's what I really want to get out of the weekend, is that they meet the other coaches and that there becomes some sort of communication at some point. The NHL has this great women in coaching, I guess, yearly thing where a woman is paired with two NHL coaches, could be assistants or head coaches, and it's project based, and so they come up with projects and they work together throughout the season, and then they present at the end to the whole group. And so it is kind of a mentorship, but it goes both ways. The men are learning just as much from the women, and so that's not necessarily an easy program to get into, but that's sort of my eventual goal, is that they could get into that and maybe meet the people on how to get into that sort of program. But I want them to have some development throughout the season for them, and this was sort of the first entry point, I guess.
Sammy Joe, I wanted to mention, when you were playing, we used to hold annual coach conferences for the program of excellent coaches, bringing in the best from each province. And one year, I think we had 6 NHL coaches there. And as a director of scouting, I was looking at player evaluation and what you look for. And I had each coach sit with, each provincial coach sit with an NHL coach. And they had to break down video with that coach. And Lisa McDonald came up to me after and said the best thing she ever heard, because she heard them talk about things to a depth and to a degree of detail that made her appreciate what she didn't know. And that exercise is huge, really huge. So I'm really glad you've got that going, and it's a great step in the right direction. So
It's really the first time I think in women's hockey we've had the money to invest in something like this, so that's credit to the ownership group that sees value in this as well, and that we're kind of pushing it forward. So it's not just about the players getting better every year, but ensuring that the coaches do too.
Yeah, it's really about helping them appreciate and embrace the whole idea we talk about all the time is you're never done learning and growing as a coach. And it's really important just to get out there and, because they're fun. We all know those conferences are a ton of fun, and both socially, interactively, technically, tactically, philosophically, it just gets the juices flowing. And just to be able to have the resources to get out there, spend a weekend or whatever with a whole bunch of coaches, it almost doesn't matter what you're talking about or what you're hoping to learn. It's just the process of being open to learning is the most important thing.
Dom, I got a question for you. You're watching a lot of the NHL playoffs? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, and again, like there's certain series that you kind of gravitate to. Like I was really interested, obviously, right or wrong, in Toronto. Just in the yeah, just the because the pressures that are there, and whether it was Edmonton as well. I mean, obviously, Boston. So yeah, the short answer is yes. I've been watching quite a bit.
And I'm still as great as a player as Leon Draisaitl is. I still do not understand how he can't put a little more effort and attention into the defensive side of the game. He's just freaking deplorable at times. It's really, really unfortunate to watch. He's such a fabulous player, and obviously, he's totally emotionally invested in trying to be the best he can be. And I just hope he comes to the epiphany that that we all know Yzerman came to at some point, and Ovechkin to some degree with under Trotz, and helped them win a Stanley Cup. Like, you spend a hell of a lot more of your time without the puck than you do with the puck. And I just, if he was a better defensive player, they might have won that series. He cost them one game almost by himself, even as he was scoring. However,
yeah, and again, and this is just my own personal view on this. And I watched the last game. I really do believe. I'm not sure who's got music on.
That's a national anthem.
That sounded like you were in a montage.
It's Tom. I muted it again.
That sounded like there was going to be this huge Olympic entrance or something to what was going on.
I was just for Dom.
I appreciate that, Tim. I don't feel, and again, this is just as I said, preface it by saying it's my opinion. I don't think they took, by playing those two guys as much as they did, they took everybody else out of the game. It was like they were playing every second shift. And I get it that, they've gotten points and whatever else have you. But I feel, and again, they just, I saw Nugent Hopkins, and there's some of these other guys, I barely saw them on the ice. I saw these guys were going every second shift. And, I think that it comes down to, yes, are they going to score goals? Yes, sure. But at the end of the day, it's the team that ultimately, the best team that does it. And I think they got carried away by being okay, we're going to put these two guys together and they'll score us whenever they need to score us goals whenever they need to score. And I think he just took the rhythm and everything out of everyone else. And again, like the argument could be made, oh, they don't have the depth. I don't think you allowed to have the depth. You didn't allow to have your other, like more of a consistent attack as opposed to waiting for the power play, right? And McDavid had that one interview in the last game. He got snippy at it, and because they asked him, it was his second even strength goal, and he's like, well, it doesn't matter, a goal's a goal. And they had one power play the last game. And so again, this is just my own thing. Until they figure out how to be able to make more inclusive, to be able to have at least 3 lines that are able to go and go back to that. And I just I don't see a way that you're able to win. Because I think, to your point, Tim, Draisaitl doesn't, like, if he's at 70% in the defensive zone and it's not a big deal to him to be able to compete and whatever else have you, because he's just expected, quote unquote, to score, he becomes a liability. And like you said, like, it's deplorable the way his attention to detail on the defensive side, right? But
yeah, and to your point exactly, I would love to have a conversation with Todd Woodcroft. He's obviously done a really good job there. When he took over the Oilers, the most dramatic thing that happened was he reduced McDavid and Draisaitl's ice time from 25, 26, 27 minutes down to 21, 22, 23. And now he's gone completely away from that. And, they took off like a rocket when that happened. And now he's gone away from that in the old coaching trap. Like, you got to get your best players out there. They're the only ones that can win the game. What we talk about all the time on the developmental level is you got to find a role for the bottom people. I don't know whether they had injuries, but they had 2 or 3 forwards that were playing 3 or 4 minutes a game the last 2 or 3 games. And I totally agree with you, Dom. Like, I would love to hear him speak to that point, like how, why, and does he think that was in any way, shape, or form? And I would love to hear Connor and Leon weigh in on it as well. Did they play too much? Were there 2-minute power plays, and they got penalty killing time, and were they not enough of a team? Basically, 4-line teams have won the Stanley Cup for the last 7, 8, 10 years, and until you become a true 4-line team, you're not going to be successful, I don't think, in this day and age.
Yeah,
Kim,
and maybe it's. Go ahead.
I'd like to comment on that. I don't call what Draisaitl did and the shift length and the play without the puck as cardinal. In other words, it's important, but it's not the kind of thing you should sit for.
I didn't say that.
What? No, I know you didn't. The point I'm trying to make is he did things that were cardinal that cost them. And he took bad penalties. He took reaction penalties. That's something visible, obvious, and minor hockey I'm talking about here now that you have to address. And when I see behavioral things occurring with players and your best players, you've really lost the concept of what it takes to win. So I was more concerned about the penalties he took, his body language on the ice, and the frustration that was shown, because I'm not worried about his defensive play. I'm worried about his offensive contribution, and I'm not going to address that to the point where we're going to be butting heads all the time. But that's
but for me, Wally, one of the cardinals was lack of effort or awareness back checking. And for me, that's a cardinal.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to be a successful team, if you don't have your best players buying into the fact that they got to back check as hard as everybody else, they got to be aware as everybody else on the back check how to help nullify the rush. Those are the things that are, and just, it's really, really simple. I mean, he's a fabulous player, and he's obviously a great teammate in lots of ways. But it's as simple as we've talked before. Defensively, figure out when you don't have the puck in your own end of the rink, figure out where it might go next and try to help deny one of those options. And if he just thought that way a little bit more, he'd be a hell of a lot better. And I think you can almost say the same about McDavid as well. Like he just thinking about sniffing the puck a bit too much in my mind. He needs to think more about, we need to defend first to get the puck, not sniff to get the puck so we can get out of the zone. It's a mindset thing, and it's a hockey sense thing, and eventually I think it's got to get through to them, I would think or hope.
I got a question here. The age-old sayings are the best defense is a good offense, and the best offense is a good defense. And that's sort of the crux of the fine line of coaching in terms of how you focus on that element and in getting everybody to buy into both sides of the puck, respecting their gifts. And I think that's an art. Now, listen, the talk on Yzerman changing his role. Tim, I had a question, and I've got the same question for anybody else. I don't know that, other than Dom and yourself, Tim, you've experienced the NHL enough. How many other players in the NHL do you know that have changed their roles to extend their careers?
Well, I don't think it was a career extension thing for either of them so much as I want to win a championship kind of thing. And what are we missing as a team? What am I missing as a player? And how can I make a more positive contribution to a winning effort? I think that's where it sort of comes from, Wally, as much as anything. And I'm sounding really critical of Draisaitl. He's one of the, and I don't mean to be in a big way, but I really think he's got a whole nother level to get to as a player, being a complete player. And Yzerman is a real good example of that. And Ovechkin, I don't watch him enough to know if he's really a better defensive player, but that's what the talk was around the league, that he sort of, Trotz feels like he sort of got him to toe the line a bit better when he was there, and they won a cup. And, it's, I mean, it's just important to play the game in a complete way with as many players as you can. And it's so important to have your absolute best players. If they're going to be playing, 22, 25 minutes a game, you need them playing a complete game. So you don't score 2 and give up 3. That doesn't help you, obviously.
I just think they play too much.
Yeah.
Like I think like I'm looking at their time on ice right now in the final game. Like they're 25 minutes. Draisaitl's 24 minutes and 44 seconds. Like I just think that's it's too much. And you take the rhythm out of for me. And again, this isn't rocket science. I'm sure you guys have both played this way. Like certain lines set up. Like you have a line that has offensive zone time, and then you have a change, brings another line in, and you build momentum, and then it ends up being quote unquote the third line that ends up paying off because you've got that team stuck in their end, right? It's like I feel like they just eliminate having other guys involved. Like and I'm looking at ice times. Like Nugent Hopkins plays. He plays 18 minutes. So like that to me is the right amount of time to be able to play the right way, to be able to be responsible on the defensive end. Because I don't think it's a want on Draisaitl. I think it's just like the physiology behind it, where you're not at your 80-90%. Like it's either you're 90% rested and you're able to do certain things on both sides of the puck. When that drops off a little bit, you're not able to be as good as you are on the defense side of the puck because you're like, for lack of it, like you're tired or you're fatigued. And I mean, they're all elite trained athletes, but I just think that, you know, they're just not able to keep up with, you know, when they come out with, you know, Riley and Carlson and whoever else out there, and they get stuck out there against them, and they're on their own end, and now they're just, you know, trying to get the puck out to get to the next shift. Like I think that to me was evident, right? Like, and you look with Edmonton, like they've got, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forwards that played under 15 minutes, right? So I've played those minutes. It's tough to stay in the game and to have a rhythm and to be able to be a part of that. And that was the overall sense that I got with that. And that's the thing that I, you know, that really stuck out to me. They weren't a team. They were basically waiting for those two guys to score. And if the other guys, like, and you saw it even when they were celebrating, like those other lines scored, like guys were like over the moon excited but in a different type of way that they scored, because it was like, oh my God, someone else actually scored a goal other than these other two guys that were involved, right? And so to me, it was almost like two separate teams. And then, you know, you look at the interviews after the games, like Draisaitl said, you know, we wasted a year. Like, it's almost like I did everything I could. Like I was, you know, but like, to me, it's that's where, as a coach, that's where, you know, you control the ice time, you control how much, and I get it. The pressure to play those guys as much as you could is enormous, because everybody's like, oh, these guys are the best. You know, they're setting the record for goals. They're setting the record for this and for that. Well, you're out in the second round, fellas, right? So obviously the recipe isn't the right one, you know, and it's not like it's the first year that they've kind of gone at that. That's where I'm at. Like, and I keep going back to it. Like, you're not going to win with two lines, and that's basically what they played, right? And so that to me is the thing that stands out.
Here's what my point on that. The business of hockey is winning. And I've always measured this in female hockey, Tim, with if I saw two players play penalty kill and power play, I said, you're in trouble. That affects minutes. If you have the best offensive players killing penalties at the most critical times, whenever, then you are taking away ice time from people capable of playing defensively without the puck. You add TV timeouts to that, you're giving recovery time to your best players. And Carla McLeod brought this point up with me with her Czechia team. She said when they had the Worlds, they have TV timeouts, and it cut back on her ice time. And people weren't happy, and she understood that, but she addressed it. And you're talking about going through a whole season, going into playoffs, trying to win games, the standings. Boy, you're almost better off without the two best players in the league and leading scorers, because you can manage the bench easier. So the art now becomes, how do you coach everyone to be the best they can be for their team? You know, I judged Toronto. I thought shot blocking by their two best players, Matthews and Marner, they were blocking shots. They were laying their bodies out there. They wanted to play in both hands. I also, you know, I saw them penalty killing a lot. And I just wondered about the wear and tear of that to their offensive contribution, and how when you build a team, if you can create that mentality of just creating and balancing the ice time to feel valued. And I think in minor hockey, it's critical. In minor hockey, I'm talking junior and below. You know, major, junior, and below. And even college, and for myself, even the national team. So that you don't win with the best players, you win with the best team has always been my line. And I think that's what we're sort of talking about here. And Tim, in all your years of coaching female hockey, have you seen any female player change their role in a significant way to stay on the team for another year or extend their career?
Well, I know I had that discussion, um, and Wick was kind of asked to do that the last year or two she played in some way, but I'm not sure how far it actually got. But again, it's, you know, I guess I wanted to respond because I know we sort of respectfully disagree on this, Wally, but I think your best players have to be good penalty killers. But I agree they shouldn't be first ones up all the time doing a lot of the lifting there. But they need to be penalty killers. And it's obviously ideal if you've got sort of 4 to 6, you know, like 2 or 3 pairs of people you really deeply trust penalty killing, and they do the bulk of the work there. But I think it's important to be able to keep your best players in the game in those situations where you get 2 or 3 penalties in a row. And again, I'm not disagreeing with the overall point that probably actually Marner and Matthews and McDavid and Draisaitl did too much penalty killing in the playoffs for both teams' own good. You got to manage those minutes a lot better, and really that's what we're talking about is, you know, spreading the workload out. But those players have to be able to get out there penalty killing to keep them intimately in the flow of the game. But anyway, that's just my own perspective too.
I want to bring the point on Haley and wanting to continue to play. I really felt she could have contributed and continued to play if she accepted a different role, took on a leadership role, sort of a mother hen role with the team, no longer the lead player with the team or the power play go-to person, which I don't think she was at the time. But I really advocated for that. But in the end, I felt the coaching staff has to know how to do that. It's a sensitive area in terms of making the player accept and appreciate and buy into their new role for the sake of the team without hurting the team. So I in the end, I felt that the best decision was made, but it's a very difficult thing to change a role. And I'm going back now a long way to the most significant role change that I've ever seen in hockey that extended her career. The 7th defenseman at the Nagano Olympics was Cassie Campbell. And when she tried out in 2002, I was coaching her at the Oval, and I told her, if you want to make the team, you've got to make it as a forward. She made the team as a forward, and I believe played in another 2 Olympics. So she was able to change positions, and the leadership role and her temperament went along with whatever she had to do to continue to play and influence. She was able to do. So I just wanted to bring those names up on the female side because I have no idea of, you know, the egos of players and the egos of teammates relative to getting everybody to really respect each other to the point where if the coach makes a decision and it's in keeping with the philosophy of a team, you can live with it. You can live with losing because you've agreed with that.
Probably, Wally, the best example of that on the female side, in my mind, is right in front of us right now. Jamie Lee Rattray. Patty Kazmaier winner, I think. Premier offensive player in the NCAA and for her whole career. And now she's a plug in to different roles, different situations, playing the 4th line, sit out a game, be the 13th forward. She might be the best example of that in either the men's or the women's game, and couldn't be happier for somebody like Jamie Lee. She's such a fantastic person. In lots of ways, it's not surprising that she's been able to do that, but she is for sure, in my mind, the best example of that. 13 forward at Worlds and jumps in there and scores big goals, critical goals, plays big minutes, and it's a fantastic tool to have as a coach, to have somebody like that can play up and down your forward lines and slot in and be the work player on the top line or an offensive player on a bottom six line. It's a great tool to have.
Kirk Muller comes to mind for me. He was, obviously, I think he was I'm pretty sure he was that 93 or 14 Montreal Canadian team that had won, and he was scoring all those overtime goals. I remember watching that. And then I remember playing against him. He was in Dallas, and I was on the fourth line, and he was out there on the fourth line role, and he was, like come playoff time, he was the old man line, I think they called it. Dave Reed, him, and might have been Scrudlin, might have been the other guy. But again, a guy that recognized ended his career winning more of a defensive role. And, again, like, it's no coincidence that he's very well liked on the coaching side as well, because he's kind of been at different roles over the course of his career and had to adapt and everything else. So that's one that comes to mind for me.
And I think the other guy that comes to mind, I'm just looking him up here, not Thomas Steen, but what's his son's name, who played 1,000 games and
yeah, right. Yeah, I know who you're talking. Yeah,
took on the fourth line role basically in St. Louis. I mean, he was 1,000 game player in the NHL. Oh man, we were just talking about him yesterday with Peter Elander, Alex Steen. So he would be another one, Wally. Totally, I'm just looking up his stats, but totally changed his role, embraced a sort of checking role in his last couple of years. I mean, he was, better than half a point game guy through his, he's he was a 20 plus goal scorer 3 or 4 times, and basically took on a checking role the last couple of years in St. Louis, and helped him.
Yeah. So
he's another.
I remember guys referencing him like being a big part of it, right? Like, it's to say to him, like him taking that fourth line role, and like you have to be responsible, for a fourth line. You've got to be able to put him out. And you talk about having a team that wins. St. Louis was a team that won, and to be able to have that depth and that, and you can, I'm sure, just as I say, looking at his stats, like he had 10 points in 20 games, but played a significant role. Like those are big. I mean, 4 of those goals, I'm sure you look like those are big goals from your fourth line that you're, but to be able to take that on, I mean, that's the difference between why teams win and why teams don't, right? Like who's willing to accept not a lesser, but a different role to be able to,
Yeah, no less important. Maybe lesser ice time wise and everything, but no less important. And it's where the humility and being a humble player who just loves the game and respects the game and enjoys playing the game. It's a big part of that. When you get your ego, let your ego lead the way, like you just can't do that kind of thing. A lot of respect for those kind of guys and women.
I've got another question, Dom and Tim, especially.
And Rick.
Listening
patiently.
I think Dom, playing in the NHL and coaching in the NHL, and the Calgary Flames come to question the playoffs now. And when they talk about Bennett and the role he's playing, and the other guy and the role he's playing, and they didn't play that role, at least Bennett didn't on the Flames team. And all of a sudden they go there and play like they're playing. And I'm just wondering about this art of coaching and how you create the star concept, the role concept. Well, your role is, and how can you have two first lines in the NHL? You know what I'm saying? You're watching it happen before your eyes, and you know them because you've been on the ice with them. What's your take on how well they're playing? Is the environment they're in the right time for them to step up?
Yeah, I think I think with Sam in particular, I think, and again, this is my my opinion on it, and it, whether it's right or not, who knows? But he never got the chance, like the legitimate chance to play at center in with certain players. They gave him opportunities, but and I'll be honest with you, like I watch him, like he's terrible on faceoffs. Like you look at his percentages and they're awful on faceoffs. But I think, whoever has kind of given him the role to be like, they've kind of overlooked that side of it. And they've given him, because like I know as a centerman, there's just certain things, instincts that you have that just, being in the middle of the ice, being able to maintain your speed at times. I mean, like it's like there's times that I felt sorry for O'Reilly in the defenseman in Toronto, because he's like a shark out there, like just kind of coming around and then being able to, like, so effective that you never really knew when he was coming at you. And so I never really felt like he had that leash in Calgary. Like, and I think actually it came up some article I read, and they talked about, they had Monty and they had Backlund ahead of him, and he was kind of, he had to play wing if he was going to play with those guys. And if you look at it objectively, it's like, oh, he's not very good on the draws, so maybe he's better suited for in the wing. But and again, like I'll watch, games with him play, and yeah, he's, there's parts of his game that, like Monty and Johnny were, they high level of execution. I don't think Sam has a high level of execution, but I think his overall game at center is more suited to what wins you games in the playoffs. And I think that's ultimately what, when you saw it in small sample size, you're like, oh, he's not executing, he's bad on the draws, he's kind of loose, and he's kind of, but I think it's, yeah, you just really didn't, and again, Michael Backlund, really, really good on the draws, really sound defensively, could execute. And I think that's part of the reason they didn't give him opportunity. But again, like it's easy to sit back as an armchair quarterback here and just kind of say, oh, you should have done this. But from my side, I think those were some of the things that factored into it. But I mean, he's so effective. And again, he's still doing the same things that, as if you look at him objectively as a centerman and say, God, he's terrible. I think a couple games I looked, he was like 25% on the draws. Like that's horrible. Like you want to be at least 50. And I think that's probably factored in a little bit in that. But I mean, I think the biggest thing, as I said, is that when you're a center and he was drafted as a center and he played as a center, and he had that kind of, to be able to build up momentum through the middle of the ice and to be able to kind of see things in that way, and to be able to have that X factor that, like, when he comes and he finishes checks on you, like he's on top of you right away. I think they took that away. That took that away from him playing wing a little bit. And he didn't. And again, you're coming through the middle of the ice with all kinds of pace and speed with a middle lane drive and all that. I think that restricted him. And now he's obviously been able to play. And now he's got somebody with Chuck who's so smart to be able to, like, extend possession a lot of the time, because he's so good at protecting it. Because he's a train wreck to watch skate. Like, you watch him skate, you're like, how does this guy play in the NHL and be so effective? he's lumbering down the ice and everything else. But I think they just really, really complement each other. And I mean, they just gave those guys fits, right? And so, but that's just my sense. They just didn't give him a long enough runway, and were willing to overlook some of the things that, that the warts in his game a little bit, right?
I think those are all good points, Dom. I like from my seat, a couple of things that are interesting. I remember sitting with Rob Ramage, watching, I think, the major junior all-star game, and talking about who the best players were that year. He said, I like Sam Bennett. He thought he was the best player in the draft that year. And I think, he had a tough start in Calgary. Like he didn't sort of produce, if I remember correctly, he had a tough time putting up the numbers, and we know that happens to players. But I think there was a loss of belief in him as an offensive player. And I totally agree with you. They did not give him the opportunity to play in the top six on a consistent basis. And, who doesn't love to have a player, like an offensive player like him, who plays as hard as he does and can be as intimidating as he is, even though he does, of course, cross the line at times physically. But, that's a pretty unique kind of player. He was a over 100-point guy in his last year in junior. And, it might surprise you. I just looked up his faceoff stats. 3 of his last 4 years with Calgary, he was over 50%. And so, and his last year and then this past year, I think he was below 50. But, I think there was just a lack of belief in him. Unfortunately, and where that came from, who knows? But it's too bad. It's good for him. But I really did not like to see him go. I thought he was, in the same way as I thought Toronto made a big error in, they're trying to decide, do we give Nylander the big, huge bucks? Do we sign Hyman, or do we let him go? They let Hyman go. They signed Nylander to the big bucks. And who doesn't love having a Zach Hyman on your team? Like, geez. And as great a player as Michael Nylander is, how many teams can do without him in the playoffs in some ways? And again, I'm talking and he had a good playoff this year. He was effective offensively, but not a puck retrieval guy, and all players can't be all things. But I think that was a big error for them, especially holding out and all that stuff. Is like, hey, you don't want to be here? Go play somewhere else. Get your money. We got a hard-working, gritty, offensive, a guy that can contribute offensively, defensively, penalty killing, shot blocking. We'll take him, and you go find your money somewhere else. I thought it was a big error, but
fellas, I've got our last mass of the school year, and my AD just gave me the side eye, so I've got it starting at 9:20. So I better make my way. Trust me, I'd love to continue this conversation here.
Hopefully it's geometry and you can get some angling work in.
Always a pleasure, fellas. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, Don, for your time.
I got to run too, Wally, and
okay.
I'm going to be in Phoenix next week for the next month, actually. But
okay.
I'll try to jump on, and you should try to get to. I'm going to hopefully, fingers crossed, WestJet will keep my flight on the schedule. I hopefully can get to Daryl Burney's celebration on Saturday. It'll be good to see Buck and Susan.
Rick, while you're on with Tim, you interested in coffee Friday morning at Cadence? Tim and Rick.
I'm tied up, Wally.
You're tied up. Okay.
I could maybe do that, Wally. We should see if Carla is free, and or Scott, or whoever else. I haven't seen Morris forever. See if Mike and maybe
I'll make a few calls and I'll put the word out with an email. Tim and I are meeting for coffee. Join us to a few people. See what we
Yeah,
can
what-
shoot the breeze for a while. Meet you at 9:00, Tim.
Sure, sure. Just let me double check 1 second, because I am leaving the next day. I just want to make sure I don't have something on Friday morning. If I don't need to worry about that. No, that's tomorrow morning, actually, Friday morning. I don't think I do, so I should be able to get there.
Okay, we'll see you at 9.
Okay,
Take care, guys. Thanks
Yeah.
for the time.
take care.
All right, guys.
Sayonara.